Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Well, hello there. I'm Chris Steyerwalt.
And I'm Eliana Johnson without a voice today.
Barely. Welcome to Ink-Stained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media. And America, let me tell you, 25% of Eliana Johnson is worth 100% of most people. This is true. But for the Eliana Johnson enthusiasts, the people who are Team EJ in our audience, I regret to inform you that because my friend and colleague is struggling with a laryngitis situation, you're going to get more Steyerwalt than you want this week. That's going to be your situation. But rather than doing without Eliana, she has gamely agreed to be with us. Are you going to be okay?
I'm going to survive.
All right. It sounds like there's intrigue around your voice. It sounds like we're doing something in a spy novel. So we're gonna lean into that.
I was told only to worry if it goes on for 2 weeks.
Wow. So how far into it are you?
It's been a week.
Oh my gosh. That is unfair. Is the rest of your family ill?
They were before I was.
Ooh, mom always gets it last. Well, hopefully they're taking good care of you. Hopefully Patrick is bringing you hot water with lemon and honey.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that being said, why don't we progress to our front page? And I want to know, Eliana, what kind of subscription rates we're getting from the federal government. Because if we don't need a lot, if the federal government would just pay, something modest, a couple $100,000 a year for Ink-Stained Wretches, I think it would be a great value for them.
Totally.
The story of Politico and the USAID was a sort of perfect encapsulation of how the media is doing in the first month of Trump 2.0. And so first story, Washington Post, Republican ire at USAID finds an unusual target, Politico. Washington Post, of which Politico was a unlicensed spinoff, an unauthorized spinoff, takes a little pleasure in it, but it breaks down how it all played out. So as the Doge crew was going through the USAID budget, the defunct-ish, the currently kind of defunct USAID, they found that there were tens of thousands of dollars that were being paid in subscriptions to Politico Pro.
Well, I think my impression actually was that it emerged online. Somebody online found it, and then Elon jumped on it. But
I have a less charitable. Okay. I have a less charitable reading of that, which is that this was put out, and this was put out to show it's sort of perfect, right? That you have an enemy of the American people, as Donald Trump would say, Politico. You have USAID, because the original reporting, so the reporter Byron Tao.
He's at the AP.
He's at the AP now. I think he once was at Politico. I don't know.
And he once was at the Journal.
He once was at the Journal. So maybe Byron Tao came upon this himself, but I think another user had it, and then it was debated and back and forth. The upshot was, we were told by Musk X, that Politico was being subsidized by the federal government, and that it was $9 million or something. And what was really happening was all of these subscriptions to Politico Pro, and what Politico Pro is basically like a Bloomberg terminal or something else. It's for people who are in the federal government. It works well for people who are in the federal government and want to access transcripts, want to access records, want to access all of this stuff. And Politico has these extraordinarily expensive subscriptions that government agencies buy. So there's a notable but much smaller form of waste, which is, why can't they come up with a better way to do these subscriptions rather than having all of these subscriptions across the federal government? And it also gives us an insight into Politico's business model and how dependent they are on this cash flow. But so Politico publishes a note, this is from The Hill, publishes a note to set the record straight on government subscription outrage. Politico has been the subject of debate on X this week. Some of it has been misinformed. Some of it has been flat out false. Let's set the record straight. The outlet wrote as part of a memo published on its website. Politico is a privately owned company, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But Donald Trump says, according to Axios,
I think we should note that there were two different strands of this story. One was outrage at USAID for paying a lot for these subscriptions. And the other was outrage at Politico for its failure to disclose the extent to which it is underwritten, its revenues derived from the federal government. And I would say what I would describe as a lot of speculation, conspiracy theorizing that their coverage is left wing because they were getting so much subscription revenue from the government during the Biden administration, but before that. And so the story took on sort of two different lives. And in my view, questioning whether it's worth it for the government to subscribe to Politico Pro, that's reasonable. It's a very expensive product. But to me, it's sort of a government judiciousness issue, not really a Politico issue.
Right. And I feel very confident that the people at Politico Pro or at Politico would
be left wing, regardless of whether they took
are not canting their coverage.
Exactly.
It's not paid for. It's not like they were a bunch of right wingers who said, well, gosh, I guess we'll have to take a left wing position because the government is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on our subscriptions. Donald Trump, though, according to Axios, they're canceling. And a minute, please do two things. This is a GSA memo to the GSA. Pull all contracts for Politico, BBC, E&E, Energy and Environment.
And E&E is Politico as well.
And Bloomberg, pull all media contracts for just GSA. Cancel every single media contract today for GSA only. And this is a good example. There are, I'm sure, government agents. So the General Services Administration is the overall, the contractor clearinghouse for the federal government. And I'm sure that if you work at, say, the Securities and Exchange Commission, you probably need a Bloomberg terminal, right? If your job is to keep an eye on financial markets, you probably need that. And there are probably people at Energy, EPA, people at the Department of the Interior that need the latest up-to-date information on these things. So and this is sort of what we're talking about with USAID, what we're talking about in general. This is the breaking part, and then we don't know what the fixing part is, right? So you cancel everything, you lock the doors, you throw everybody out, you do this stuff, and then can you put it back together again? And watching Marco Rubio, one has to feel very bad for Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is a believer in big parts of the mission of USAID, because a big part of the mission of USAID is to pay for peace, right? It's dollar diplomacy. I don't know how many billions of dollars we give to Egypt. Why do we give that money to Egypt? Not because it makes us feel good, but because we've tried the alternative in Egypt briefly, and it was very bad. It was very bad and dangerous to U.S. interests, dangerous to Israel, dangerous. So some of this is just dollar diplomacy and is cheaper than fighting a war. Rubio's argument that it acts like an NGO instead of acting like a part of the U.S. government, and that it doesn't pursue U.S. interests first. That's not without basis. But fixing it, and right now there are legitimate concerns about what's happening in around the world is the services are disrupted, and it makes our allies nervous. It gives the Chinese an opportunity. So again, breaking is easier than fixing. Fixing is hard and it takes time. But I guess if you take in the light most favorable to the Doge, what you're saying is we're going to break it first. And by the way, USAID was a great first target because foreign aid is unpopular. Has bipartisan, is unpopular. Why are we giving money to these other countries? We should be having that money here. And the services that they render don't directly touch Americans, except for a very, very small number. And it's foreign facing and it's unpopular. So that's a great first target. Now, as they turn to the Department of Education, something that's unpopular with Republicans, they get into the part where they will be potentially disrupting services for Americans. And all of the pork and stuff that's at the Department of Education is there for a reason. It got put there by a politician, right? It was put there for a politician because it was helping a politician. Some of it might be done away with, and it's a vestige, it's a fossil from some previous era, but a lot of it is going to cause disruption and cause hurt. So this will be a much more difficult target. While this is all going on, we have a judge has delayed the deadline for the buyout, and we have basically federal employees were sent a mass email, a Doge email that said, if you quit now, we'll pay you out through the end of the fiscal year, and you can look for another job. You probably won't have to do any work, and we'll pay you out so you get a cushion to do another job. Judge has ruled that it couldn't. We're recording this Friday morning. Judge ruled that it was supposed to take effect on Thursday. Judge ruled no, there's legal questions around this, and punted it into next week. The question then is, how much of this is cash for clunkers, which is to say the churn in the federal workforce. There's 2 million civilian employees in the workforce, 40 or 50,000 people. Certainly there's more churn than that at least that much churn in a given fiscal year, right? People retire, people take other jobs, people go away. And the question is, who are they losing with this? And some people are concerned that who they're losing are people who can get other jobs, and that the people who are staying are the people who can't get other jobs. And that you get a big brain drain here, but you also it's a cash for clunkers where you're just moving up departures that were going to take place anyway and subsidizing them. So we will see about that. As to conclude our Doge moment, it was very interesting to see that old media still has some stroke in the new administration. So there's been substantial obsession with these young men that Elon Musk has brought in to seize the reins of the federal cash disbursement system and to go spelunking around in the finances and all of what they're doing. And it's, they're kids. And it was shrugged off.
Which, by the way, is the way it is in every administration.
Right. That is right. Not necessarily for those jobs, but every administration.
These jobs don't really exist in any other administration, but it is children who come in and run the government in every administration.
Yes, the 25-year-old that finds
because those are the people who can spend 23 hours a day working
for relatively low pay. So Marco Ilez, 25-year-old software engineer and employee of Elon Musk Doge, has resigned from his role. The White House confirmed his resignation came after a report from the Wall Street Journal that linked him to a now deleted social media account that shared racist content and advocated for eugenics. I assume that this young man I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he is not a sincere racist. I don't know what kind of name Marco Ilez is, but I assume that he's not Aryan Brotherhood. And I assume, looking at the post that he made, that he is of the trollish variety of racist, which of course can lead one to actual racism. As Kurt Vonnegut wrote, we are what we pretend to be, so we should be careful about what we pretend to be. But it was interesting. The Journal finds this guy and finds these old posts where a lot of it seemed to be about Indian Americans working in Silicon Valley and stuff like that. And they found it. And what was amazing was, to me, that he quit. They pushed him out. To me, and there may be another example, but to me, this was the first one of these on a personnel basis. We've had other things pushed back or walked back by the Trump administration, but by my recollection, this was the first firing of a person who was targeted by media coverage, I think. Okay, what is going on at the Federal Communications Commission? So the David Folkenflik, who is always useful, always helpful, breaks down for NPR the story of the attack on CBS. And I don't believe that CBS has paid any tribute to Donald Trump yet. Maybe they have. The innovation that we saw from ABC, we've seen from Meta and others, is to get Donald Trump to settle a lawsuit, you agree to pay a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars, to his presidential library as tribute. And then it costs less for you because you're putting it'll grow. You set some money aside and it'll grow. And then by the time Trump leaves office.
And aren't you making it nonprofit dollars? Can they do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, you mean, is it a tax write-off to contribute to? That's a good question. Are presidential libraries nonprofit, tax deductible?
I would assume they are, right?
We should stop that. We should definitely not have presidential library, or you have to be dead. How about this? The president has to be dead before the contributions can be tax deductible, because otherwise it's just tribute, as we saw the Clintons do. It's the slush fundability of these things is quite a lot. But so CBS is the fixation. Donald Trump, I forget what he said on social media, but it was that CBS should be eliminated, or whatever he said should be done to CBS. But so there's a lawsuit. Trump, I believe, has sued CBS, and it's over the 60 Minutes Kamala Harris interview. But more significantly, Brendan Carr, the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, is going after CBS stations' licenses for airing this and looking at equal time and all of that stuff. To that end, a very helpful piece from Robert Korn Revere and Robert Korn Revere, writing for the Columbia Journalism Review, was chief counsel formerly for the FCC. And basically what he lays out is the danger of score settling and going afterwards. And he writes it as an open letter to Brendan Carr. As a First Amendment advocate and former chief counsel, I respectfully offer some thoughts for your consideration as you had the agency tasked, With all due respect, it is not enough to hear what a government official may say about his or her commitment to freedom of expression. What matters is how that person acts once entrusted with the power of the office. That is especially true of those who serve the FCC, an agency that works in the shadow of the First Amendment, as former Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer put it, both statutory and constitutional command. And it's a blueprint for why viewpoint and how going after viewpoint stuff by the FCC is very, very dangerous. And to that end, my AEI colleague very helpfully, Clay Calvert, very helpfully lays out when anti-press ascendancy meets FCC public interest regulation. And he begins, let's start with an understatement. When President Donald Trump isn't happy with the way most American journalists are doing their jobs. Yes, this is true. He writes, at bottom, however, Trump's lawsuit against CBS pivots on a more nebulous notion, the public interest. His complaint quotes a FCC statement that, quote, rigging or slanting the news is the most heinous act against the public interest. Indeed, all over-the-air broadcast television and radio stations are obligated by a federal statute to serve the public interest, convenience, and necessity. As the FCC notes, facilitating the public interest is an obligation stations take on in exchange for obtaining valuable license to operate a broadcast station. All very true. But as Clay Calvert says, quoting Daniel Lyons, an FCC proceeding to punish broadcasters for their editorial decisions is likely to crash against the rocks of the First Amendment, costing the agency significant political capital for no lasting purpose. Indeed, James Madison, the author of the First Amendment, perhaps put it best in 1800. Some degree of abuse is inseparable from the proper use of everything, and in no instance is this more true than in that of the press. It has accordingly been decided by the practice of the states that it is better to leave a few of its noxious branches to their luxuriant growth than by pruning them away to injure the vigor of those yielding the proper fruits. Word. But to all of this, there's another interesting thing that has happened. It is the conflation of the FCC's jihad against CBS and broadcasters with what it's doing to PBS. And Ed Markey, senator from Massachusetts, has a nice encapsulation of this. What he does basically is to say that it's all the same. And he writes that exercising congressional power over news organizations for their editorial decision-making is a clear violation of their free speech right. It's censorship dressed up as oversight. He's talking here about the understandable and accurate statement that public broadcasting runs ads. The Oversight Committee is having a hearing, Marjorie Taylor Greene, so I'm sure it will be very productive, is calling NPR and PBS to testify to talk about how they actually run ads. And NPR actually does run ads. PBS actually does run ads. If you watch anything on PBS, they say when we were kids, it would be at the end of every show for 20 seconds. It would say, brought to you by blah, 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 viewers like you, and with a grant from the John T. and Catherine D. MacArthur Foundation, or with a grant from the whatever. And that's what it would say. But now you will find a lot more of these, and the difference between sponsorship and advertisement is nil, because what are those ads that are running on commercial television but sponsorships? They're sponsoring that content. So PBS, I take a backseat to no one. Well, some people, but very few, in my enthusiasm for the First Amendment protections of the free press. But government-funded publications and broadcasters are not the free press. They're the government's press. And they have different standards that they have to meet. Now, I, once upon a time, was an advocate for public broadcasting because it served rural and underserved communities, and that how in rural places in America, having a subsidized broadcaster was often the only kind of news service or informational service that people might get. And I made a place for it. But let's be honest. If NPR was not subsidized by the federal government, would it cease to exist? I can't imagine that it would cease to exist. I would have to think that it would change, but I can't imagine that
it wouldn't. The Beacon did a piece on this week that showed that NPR annually gets about over $100 million from whatever they call their ads, and $7 million from taxpayer money. But that does show just how important these advertisers are to the bottom line as opposed to the taxpayer funding. So what Carr is going after is really the Achilles heel of public broadcasting. And it's where they get the majority of their money.
And it would be, and I apologize if I'm sure there's a lot about this I don't know, but you could conceivably say, you know what, in order to keep running ads, we're going to forego the $7 million. And I don't know how this could work, how it could be spun off, how the Corporation for Public Broadcasting could be spun off. But if the answer is, okay, we're going to give up the 7 million in exchange for the 100 million, and we'll replace the 7 million by selling more advertising, I don't know. But it seems like the name of the game for the current administration is to use the tools that the left used against the right for 2 generations against the left, basically. When Pam Bondi says that they're going to prosecute and civilly sanction companies that have DEI programs, what they're saying is, oh, so you used the Civil Rights Act against us, against white people. Now we're going to use it against you. You used it to promote diversity and inclusion. Now we're going to turn it around and we're going to use it against you. And the message for public broadcasting is, we're coming for you to do to you what progressives, what the left did in the past, which is to use the part of it that's government funded to push an agenda, to push whatever. So this is feels very much like where we are now, which is that what's his name? The Rules for Radicals. Who wrote the Rules for Radicals book? Yeah, the Saul Alinsky. So as Brother Jonah Goldberg calls it, the Saul Alinsky right, using the modes and methods of the left to punch them. And I think this is a piece of that, and it's all part of that same idea, which is to use the powers of the left against the left. In some places, it may be warranted and it may be good. In other places, I suspect it will lead to an ongoing tit-for-tat battle that will continue to be destructive. Okay, now, Meta continuing its rightward moves, hiring the chief correspondent from the chief congressional correspondent from the Daily Caller. This is business news. The chief correspondent for the Daily Caller, Henry Rogers, with whom I worked at Fox News. I think he was an intern. I think that's true, but he was definitely an ambitious young man. And he is going to Meta. He's going to do lobbying, basically,
public
right?
Policy.
Yeah, he's going to do lobbying. And this is a very interesting development, that instead of hiring, so I think what you saw from tech companies and big companies before, when they would hire a Republican or hire a conservative, they would find a housebroken one, right? They would find somebody who was broadly respected. They would look for somebody who didn't antagonize the progressives who work there. They would look for someone who would do those things. This is not that, right? This is going for the actual, for the genuine article. And I think that's certainly noteworthy. What's going on at the LA Times, I think, is a great question. A writer accuses, this is from Mediaite, mass murder in waiting, writer accuses LA Times of editing his anti-RFK op-ed to support conspiracy theorist. Eric Reinhart, a political anthropologist, social psychiatrist, and psychoanalytic clinician who wrote up an op-ed for the Los Angeles Times regarding Robert F. Kennedy's nomination to serve as Secretary of Health and Human Services, tweeted his strong displeasure. He took to Twitter at how the column was edited, accusing the paper of twisting his words to, quote, suggest an argument entirely opposite of his clear intent. On Friday, Times owner Patrick Soon-Shiong tweeted a link to Reinhart's article as published and added a caption, Trump's healthcare disruption could pay off if he pushes real reform. He wrote, he is our best chance for doing so. So here you have somebody submits an op-ed to the LA Times. It is changed to align with the publisher's point of view and published. And that, I must say, is some very wild business. That is some very wild business. And I'm wondering what Soon-Shiong, where the LA Times is headed and whether that's sustainable. Okay. Follow-up file. We must follow up because I must continue to acknowledge your correctness, the pure rightness of you, which is Burgess Everett writes for Semaphore inside Tom Cotton's unconventional push for Tulsi Gabbard. It seemed impossible to me 6 weeks ago that Tulsi Gabbard could win Senate confirmation. And it seemed impossible to me because Tom Cotton, chairman of the Intelligence Committee, is no dummy and seemed to me highly unlikely to countenance Tulsi Gabbard's affection for Edward Snowden and sympathetic view of Bashar al-Assad and of Vladimir Putin, et cetera, et cetera. And Burgess Everett very helpfully lays out what Cotton was up to in all of this and how, one of the ways that you win confirmation is, as we've talked about before, is you have to eat crow and you have to say stuff that you didn't want to say. And Cotton apparently concluded that he would be better off to direct Gabbard, with whom he served in the House, that he would be better off to direct Gabbard with the help of Kristen Sinema than he would be to try to oppose her. And it's a fascinating, super interesting backstory on this. Quote, in a conversation late last year, Trump asked Cotton whether he would be able to get Gabbard out of his committee. Despite the myriad challenges ahead, Cotton answered in the affirmative. Cotton was met one by one with all the GOP members of his committee to hear out their concerns. In addition to Sinema, former Trump National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien talked to senators about Gabbard, and Trump himself spoke to Young about her, Todd Young said on Tuesday. I know there's been enormous pressure to put on members, said Mark Warner, his party's top member on the committee. Cotton said he told backers of Gabbard to give Intelligence Committee members space to make their own decisions. Republicans were flooded with vitriol from Trump supporters for their initial reluctance to immediately back Pete Hegseth's bid to lead the Pentagon. But Cotton said in the interview that he, quote, discouraged any interested party working on Tulsi's behalf from exerting any pressure. Senators deserve the time and space needed to carefully and deliberately consider Tulsi's nomination, and for that matter, any nomination or piece of legislation. Still, Elon Musk couldn't quite help himself. He called Young out as a deep state puppet over the weekend, then offered a mea culpa after speaking with the Indiana senator. Less than 48 hours before Young endorsed Gabbard, Musk called him a great ally in restoring power to the people from the vast unelected bureaucracy. So there's the backstory, and a very interesting one indeed. As soon as you have been restored in health, I will feed you a steak that will make you even stronger, even better.
Well, I think another part of the backstory is that it's not that Cotton likes Gabbard or agrees with Gabbard, but I think most Republicans are of the view that the position of DNI doesn't really matter, doesn't carry a lot of influence. That's one. And so, not that they're okay with some, kook taking that position, but they prefer it to, I think they know there are going to be some people they don't agree with in the Trump cabinet. They prefer that person to be DNI than head of the CIA or Secretary of State.
Yes.
Number two, I think they prefer to voice their disagreement with the president privately, and there are a lot of skirmishes over personnel taking place behind the scenes that just aren't going to play out in front of the cameras, which is why I thought, if Gabbard comes up for a vote, Tom Cotton's going to vote for her.
Yeah, if she was going to get there, she was going to get his vote because you disrupt it before that happens. Yes, quite so. And and 100% on the fungibility of the role of the ODNI.
Yeah,
could be.
I think if she came up and said, I'm going to be the last DNI ever, she might have gotten, every single Republican vote.
Yes, that's right. We're going to unwind this office.
They just don't like the position.
Yeah. And it's not the CIA. It's definitely not the CIA. Alert producer Colin Chicola found this Washington Post piece. The couple sign-ins are a mess. The couple who want to make America procreate again. And the natalist movement is a weird and fraught space. You have normal people like Tim Carney. Well, I mean, Tim is abnormal in the best way, my friend. But people who are generally saying the government should shift its policy focus toward families to encourage more children to be born, to make it easier for families, which is a not entirely controversial position. People may have their disagreements, but what have you. And then you have weirdos. And the Washington Post found some very weird weirdos who they could talk to about natalism. And it's rough because Simone and Malcolm Collins, these folks and their many children, it's a depressing thing to read, because obviously everybody's benefiting here, which is to say the Washington Post gets to hold up for ridicule these people who are weird, and these weird people get attention. Let's see. It's a new year, which for Simone Collins means a new pregnancy. This will be her 6th pregnancy since 2019. And if all goes well, Collins will bear her 5th child by December. She approaches each the way an endurance athlete does a marathon. She and her husband, Malcolm, have waited exactly 9 months since the birth of their last child. Industry Americus, to give Simone's body adequate time to recover. She goes through a barrage of exams, starting with, I'm not saying that. She will take the hormone medications necessary for transferring a frozen embryo to her uterus. At home, she exercises, walking for hours on a compact treadmill. She keeps at her desk and eats really well. Plain yogurt, no added sugar, hard-boiled eggs, a slurry of blended vegetables. Have you thought, Eliana, for your health about going to a slurry of blended vegetables? Maybe.
It hasn't come across the transom yet for me.
Maybe the solution is a slurry of blended vegetables.
Which would lead me to having 6 children in 6 years.
And you could celebrate by walking on a
2.
tiny treadmill. You could walk on a tiny treadmill at your desk. So this is freak gawking, in which the Washington Post is talking about an actual problem, which is America's low birth rate. Part of the reason we have the immigration debate that we do in the United States is that we rely on 1 million plus immigrants every year to the United States to avoid the fate that Japan and other countries with low birth rates have. You just stagnate, right? It just, your economy stagnates, everything. You need new people. And we have a lot of space in the United States. We have a lot of room for new people and a lot of need for new people. And our birth rates have declined to a point where we are reliant on immigrants to do that. So there's an interesting conversation. The Post opted to not have an interesting conversation about it, and instead talked about people who dress up as old-timey. He looks like a cross between a Brooklyn tattoo artist and a furloughed Civil War soldier, and she wears a Mother Goose bonnet. And so they're taking a reasonable and serious question and turning it into a freak show. So nice. Ooh, here we go. It's facile time. New York Times, as Trump attacks diversity, a racist undercurrent surfaces. I don't know if it's an undercurrent, guys. I don't know if the racism around what they're doing is an undercurrent. Seems often like an overcurrent to me. But what the Times is doing here, White House correspondent Erica L. Green, as Navy divers searched the Potomac River for bodies from the worst air crash in the United States in 20 years, President Trump zeroed in on what he saw as the cause: hiring programs that promote diversity. The meaning behind his words was clear, that diversity equals incompetence. And for many historians, civil rights leaders, scholars, and citizens, it was an unmistakable message of racism in plain sight at the highest levels of American government. His attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion aren't about a particular program or some acronym. They're just a sanitized substitute for the racist comments that can no longer be spoken openly. Margaret Wong, Southern Poverty Law Center's president and chief executive, said in a call with civil rights leaders. Well, there's the Southern Poverty Law Center cannot be ever discredited sufficiently to not be in the third paragraph of a New York Times White House piece. Are there out and out bona fide pure D racists who are enthusiastic for this effort? Yes. Is it gross that Donald Trump immediately blames and says, well, the reason that this happened is because of minority hiring? Yeah, that's gross. It is this sort of the same thing, the same conflation that we talked about with, or I talked about because you can't talk, with the PBS and what else the FCC is doing. There's gross and unpleasant and probably racist stuff that is happening around these moves and the resentment in DEI. And by the way, part of what's awful about it is that when you say it's DEI, that all bad things, there's many bad things are as a result of DEI. What is the conclusion that you then reach about individuals, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, women who are in these jobs? Well, they must not deserve it. Now, that is an obvious fruit of affirmative action programs over time. If you have lower standards, that people will look askance at the individuals from minority groups who advance. And that's been there long before Donald Trump. Trump is just is giving it a diesel-powered engine behind it, saying openly what people have said quietly for a long time. But to conflate this stuff, and if one says that diversity, equity, and inclusion, or affirmative action, has been an unsuccessful and unsatisfying thing, right? That these things have not worked. They have not delivered, as the arguments that were made before the Supreme Court around the Harvard case said, it hasn't achieved the goals that you stated for it to achieve. And when we look for the goals that you say that you have, they're amorphous, right? And conflating those two is that all criticism of these programs is, if all criticism of these programs is racist, only racists would criticize these programs. Yeah? Do you want to use a word on this one, or are you saving the words?
I guess I'm saving the words because, of course, in Trump's broadly popular actions against DEI, I mean, these are things 70% of the American public supports. Of course, racism will pop up because racism exists in the country and will attach itself to these things. That's sort of inevitable. And of course, that is the article the New York Times writes, as opposed to explaining the broad popularity of these actions.
All right. Yes. I hope it was worth it. It was worth it for me. Winging it for the Super Bowl, the Associated Press asks, broccoli might be a cheaper party snack this year. Economists with the Wells Fargo agri-food...
You know whose presidency under which this article would have never been written? Joe Biden's. That would have been like, chicken wings are so cheap.
Well, I was passing through the newsroom at News Nation the other day, and Fox and Friends was doing a segment on cheaper protein alternatives to eggs and chicken. Plant your victory garden now. Yeah. Economists with the Wells Fargo Agri-Food Institute found a surprising spread in prices for popular game day ingredients and prepared foods. So finding a balance between more expensive items and those that have dropped in price can keep the budget from running out of bounds. They've pegged the price for a Super Bowl party menu for 10 people at around $139 this year, just 0.1% more than last year. A review of data from Nielsen IQ, which tracks food scanned at retailers across the United States, shows that celery and broccoli are the best veggies for dipping this year, as both have seen price decreases. Potato chips, frozen shrimp, and cauliflower also have seen decreases. So on the one hand, news you can use, I guess, if you're putting together a menu and you're on a budget and you're trying to be cost conscious. But here's the facile part. Chicken wings are delicious and good and worth the difference in price. And you cannot substitute broccoli for a chicken wing, Associated Press. You cannot do it. And I'm to any vegetarians or whatever who are going to write in and say, well, yes, I actually find buffalo style cauliflower to be more delicious than chicken wings. I'm sure that's true in your mind, but chicken wings are delicious and they should be celebrated, not avoided. And this is a pride. We don't say switch from eggnog to water this Christmas because of the high prices of eggnog. Eat a chicken wing. Do it. Just do it. It's delicious. I'm here for the chicken wings. Okay. Staying with the Super Bowl.
I'm here for the chicken wings too.
Yeah, you're a good American. Super Bowl coverage continues with opinion piece from the Poynter Institute. Donald Trump bring back the tradition of the Super Bowl interview. Now, this would tell you how cheaply we buy traditions these days. In 2004, ahead of his reelection year, and CBS was broadcasting the Super Bowl, George W. Bush sat down for a brief interview with sportscaster Jim Nantz, where they talked. They had the kind of Jim Nantz is the friendliest kind of fellow. He begins, he says, "Hello, friends." He is a very nice man and plays golf with presidents and all of that stuff. And Jim Nantz is, you could say Jim Nantz is a sports journalist, but you couldn't say that he was a journalist, right? He covers games and he's a personality himself. He also has a replica of the 7th hole at Pebble Beach built into the cliff behind his house, which I also find very cool. I'm pro Nantz, a controversial position, but I'm pro Nantz. So they do this thing and then they do it again and they keep doing it. By the time we get from 2004 to, I believe, the Bill O'Reilly interview with Barack Obama, I forget what year that was, but it morphed over time to be, well, we're not going to have a nuzzling, sweet interview with the president by the sports broadcaster. We're going to have somebody from our news division do the questioning. And so again, this is 21 years ago that the thing starts, and it's changed over time. It's just not that much of a tradition. It's not like it's the Order of the Garter, right? This is not that. But what it means is that this year, Donald Trump, and I forget, I think it's happened out of 25 Super Bowls. I think it's happened 16 times or something. I forget what the number is. So again, it's not like an august tradition, but this year it falls because Fox is broadcasting the Super Bowl, that it falls to Brett Baer to interview Donald Trump. And I don't care. I don't care about this tradition. And I don't think it's a valuable one. And I also think that, it's good for Fox that they get to put their personality, because they air the interview in the Super Bowl pregame show. It's a 5-minute interview or whatever. It's a brief thing that, as Nantz originally envisioned it, is adding to the festivities. And Donald Trump is going to the Super Bowl, so I think we can expect a very Donald Trump kind of Super Bowl. He is the first president ever to go to the Super Bowl. Somebody asked aloud the other day, I wonder why no president has ever gone to the Super Bowl before. I wonder why no president has gone to the Super Bowl before. Can you imagine the security concerns around taking the president to the Super Bowl? So you're basically putting a Fabergé egg inside of I don't know what's bigger than a Fabergé. You're putting the Hope Diamond inside a Fabergé egg. You have this incredibly high value target, and it's happening in New Orleans, a place where a terrorist attacked around the college football national championship. So yes, the president going to the Super Bowl for the national security apparatus is not welcome news. But Trump is going, so it's going to be all Trumpy. But it will be good for Fox News to put their 6 o'clock news anchor in front of such a big audience, the people that are tuning in for the Super Bowl pregame show. And I hope Brett does a superb job and finds the way through a difficult thing. It's a brief period of time, but I will be okay if in the future if they want to call it a tradition and keep the tradition, go back to just having whoever your Jim Nantz is talk to the president for a minute about football. That's okay. They don't all have to be hard-hitting interviews. They don't all have to be whatever. I'm perfectly fine to just have. I don't know who the have Terry Bradshaw. I would be interested to see Terry Bradshaw interview Donald Trump for 5 minutes. I would be interested in seeing that. Or eventually, Eliana, you know what it could lead to? Charles Barkley interviewing the president.
I would like that.
See? And it might be the best interview yet.
I would like that.
USA Today joins many in their Super Bowl coverage of trying to tease out the resentments between Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce and Donald Trump, who Donald Trump has said that he hates. And how will this affect Travis Kelce? How will this affect the Kansas City Chiefs, who, despite being from Red America and having a more Red America fan base than the Philadelphia Eagles because of Taylor Swift's support for Joe Biden are now coded blue. Now they are left coded, which is weird because they also have a name that has been decried by anti-racist enthusiasts. It's a real scramble, is all I can say. It's a real scramble. Okay, from Super Bowl to style. Eliana, you know what might be a cooling treat for your ravaged throat is the Shamrock Shake, which is soon to return.
I would love that.
Shamrock Shake is good. And McDonald's is reintroducing, and I'm skeptical of this, but is reintroducing Uncle O'Grimacy, who is the uncle of Grimace. He is the green Grimace because the Shamrock Shake is let's be honest, the Shamrock Shake is delicious. And this is now, the marketing goes all the way down because there's the Grimace Shake, which is the summertime. Colin, is the Grimace Shake a summertime treat? I think it's a summertime treat. But around Grimace's fictional birthday, the Grimace Shake emerges, and now this is the St. Patrick's Day shake. And interesting to me, McDonald's is leaning in on stoner culture real hard on this guy because Uncle O'Grimacy looks like cannabis is the only way that I can describe it. And the advertising around it is very dazed and confused kind of energy for it. And McDonald's it has a marketing department so vast and an appeal so broad that they can do the, hey kids, greetings fellow kids, check out our cannabis bud shaped and hued Grimace alternative and then you can buy a hat with Uncle O'Grimacy on it to let everybody know that you're down. So McDonald's doing it all. Okay, now it's time for our obsessions of the week. A deep dive where we break down the stories we can't get out of our heads. And Eliana is on the injured reserve in this Super Bowl week. And my obsession is, well, it's a twofold obsession, which is that you can. So my new newsletter, I took my weekly politics newsletter from the Dispatch and put it at the Hill. And I don't know whether I said this last week, what the name was, or whether I teased. Did I say what the name of the note was going to be?
I don't think you did.
Well, because I'm classy, and this was a gift to me from my betrothed, Jessica Malugin. It's called Whole Hog Politics because I keep it classy because I'm pro meat and I also am but a simple country pundit. But so this is my honest obsession, but I will do a more respectable obsession. My honest obsession is that, and I've never had this before, but an alert reader told me this morning. You can listen to my article. The Hill has a feature where AI reads articles to you, and I love it. I've never been someplace that had that before, and the AI is very good. It reads well, and I've listened to a bunch of Hill articles already today. And I'm an audiobook person. I'm a podcast person. I'm an oral learner very much. And I know that this is probably a 10-year-old technology that I have never availed myself of, but I am tremendously excited about it. And I think that it's great. And I hope that people will try Whole Hog Politics and listen to it. And next week, we believe, you'll be able to sign up to get it in your inbox every week. What I wrote about for that, though, was and you alluded to this earlier. So the New York Times had Ipsos do an attitude survey, and we could talk about what's wrong with public opinion polling on issues. There's a lot. It depends on how you ask the question, But sometimes it's very clear. And what was very clear in the New York Times Ipsos polling was that a big plurality, 49%, agreed with the statement, society has gone too far in accommodating transgender people. Pollsters asked, thinking about transgender athletes, meaning athletes who were male at birth but who currently identify as female, do you think they should or should not be allowed to compete in women's sports? The response, 79% of respondents, including 67% of Democrats, opposed participation. Pollsters asked, thinking about medications used for transgender care, do you think doctors should be able to prescribe puberty-blocking drugs or hormone therapy to minors between the ages of 10 and 18? The response, 71% of all respondents said no one under 18 should have access to those drugs, including 54% of Democrats. And they're as Donald Trump himself is not that popular. People aren't crazy about Donald Trump, and the poll showed people weren't that optimistic. But as Democrats think about how they're going to resist, there are places where what Donald Trump has done is what effective politicians do. They've, regardless of ideological upset, people hate foreign aid. Donald Trump's going after foreign aid. People don't like trans women participating in women's sports, going after it. He's going after these things. So Democrats have to remember as they mount their resistance about where the voters really are. Okay, Eliana will be back with her obsession next week. But now we move to her favorite part of the show, which is reader mail. Dear Eliana and Chris, I hope you are well. While today, Maha means Make America Healthy Again, for me it had an earlier meaning. The late, great Orson Welles, ooh, I know what this is, compelled by financial reasons, became a spokesman for Paul Masson. In a famous outtake, Mr. Welles was clearly inebriated and exclaimed, Maha, the French.
102, take 3. Action, please.
Ah, the French. Champagne has always been celebrated for its excellence.
It's excellent. Needless to say, this remains the primary meaning of Maha to me. Sincerely, Marlo Gazzoli, Wisconsin. First of all, Mr. Gazzoli, that's the greatest name. You win the name contest of today. Marlo Gazzoli. This is fantastic. I'm in love with your name. And also, I am definitely picking up on your sense of humor because the Orson Welles outtake video of it's art, right? Orson Welles, late in his career, morbidly obese. Go look for Mr. Gazzoli. Look for the video. Look for the story of when Orson Welles appeared on Sanford and Son. If you enjoy crapulent late stage Orson Welles, go check him out on Sanford and Son. You're gonna like what you see, and just making the rounds on talk shows. And it's sad because he's, it's not good, but it's also hilarious, and it's a reminder of that in the 1970s, things were real loose in the old US of A, right? Things were real loose. And that, of course, brings us to my favorite time of the week, when we heap praise upon things. And Eliana, again, is on the bench, but rooting us on. And my favorite was, and I should credit the right people for sending me this. I certainly know that my eldest man-child was one who offered it, but because it's on brand for a person whose newsletter is called Whole Hog Politics. Wall Street Journal, Americans don't eat enough bacon. The Pork King has a plan. Smithfield, this is the guy who is the boss at Smithfield. Smithfield's next challenge could come from Washington, D.C. Well, what's really interesting here, Shane Smith has helped make the country's largest pork producer into a grunting, rooting, squealing marvel of efficiency. And Patrick Thomas, the author of this piece, this is why this is my favorite. I like pork, obviously. I like bacon. I like all of these things. But that lead, I'm going to read it again. Shane Smith has helped make the country's largest pork producer into a grunting, rooting, squealing marvel of efficiency. That's the best thing you're going to read all day. I declare it. So, Eliana, do you have any comfortable words to share with the audience before we bid adieu?
Comfortable words are not really my thing, but I look forward to having my vocal cords back.
Well, I am hoping you speedy recovery, and thank you for soldiering through this with us. You're a trooper, and we appreciate you.
Thank you.
that's all the news about the news. That's all the time we have for the news about the news. If you have a story that you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcast.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcast.com. This has been Ink-Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by the great Colin Chicola. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.